Association here today. So there we are, over to the right, my right-hand side. Thank y'all for attending. Anyone else? We have up for consideration House Bill 136, Representative Nemes. And if you will introduce yourself, introduce the persons there with you, and then we will administer the oath.
Representative Jason Nemes of the 33rd District. To my left is Dr. Jeff Block.
Representative John Stivers.
And someone who everyone knows, Eric Crawford.
Good to have y'all. If the two of you on the end will raise your right hands. Swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please sit. Representative Nemes, proceed when you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you again for bringing 136 to this committee for another hearing on it. I know we spent several hours on it last year going through it, and we tweaked the bill over the summer. We made some changes to it. With that, we've been through this before. You know, it's a big issue for the state of Kentucky, as you can see behind us and all the news folks here. It's time to get this done.
If I may, really quickly before we get to the process of this, I know this is unrealistic, but we have gone over this before in the session that I had a medical issue pop up. I wasn't able to attend it, but I know there are multiple hours then also. My intention is we have this room until 2 o'clock. I have no intention to use it until 2 o'clock.
Neither do we, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so we all know what this issue is. Let's be efficient on it and do what we need to make sure people understand what's going on so that votes can be cast intelligently.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Sub's adopted.
All right, so with the sub that you have before you has one small change from what the one that was given to you yesterday, and that is on page 17, page 18. In the language, it just changes one word. It replaces vaporizing with raw plant material. It doesn't change any intent, it just changes those words. So that's the difference between what you have today and what you received yesterday.
And because of that, there's no substantive change, and we required those committee subs to be in my hands 24 hours in advance. We were all in communication. The sub was properly delivered. There was one small wording issue, and so that's why we're going ahead and consider that today. It's been adopted. Proceed.
Thank you. What we're going to do, if we might, is Dr. Jeff Block is going to begin, and then we're going to have Eric Crawford say some words as well, and then I'll close up, and then obviously we'll have answer any questions, if that pleases you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Jeffrey Block, I'm happy he's here with us today. He's an American board-certified anesthesiologist, medical doctor, who is additionally fellowship trained in pain management and addiction medicine, and a physician professor at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. In 2014, Dr. Block was selected by the Florida Medical Association to author physician-educated mandated by that state's first legislation, and he was subsequently appointed by the Florida Surgeon General to serve as the only physician assisting the Department of Health's determination of rules and regulations for its first laws concerning cannabis when used as a medicine. And as an internationally respected thought leader in this quickly evolving subject, Dr. Block will speak on legislation designed to promote better patient outcomes. Dr. Block?
Thank you. Legislation. My talk will be finished within 20 minutes, and it's meant to be largely educational. The first few slides are approaching this from a bioethical platform. I want to do the right thing, of course, and also not ignoring public health concerns. I will read from a script. The slides are fairly descriptive, and 7 of the slides are legislative offerings that I've proposed that are involved, as the representative just mentioned, that should promote better patient outcomes. And that's the logistics. So the rationale is what I'd appreciate if you take note of. Obviously, science and reason matter, but going right to the question that physicians are confronted with, it deals with what we call primum non nocere, first do no harm. And it's a guiding maxim for clinicians, and concern for balancing risk with benefits is central to treatment decisions and patient care. Most responsible clinicians will not advise their patients to pursue a particular treatment regimen without conclusive clinical evidence and peer review confirmation regarding the relative safety and efficacy of a given treatment. Yet the compassionate physician will also be mindful of the ethical obligation to be suffering with whatever tools might be available and wherever necessary. In this context, then, the medicinal use of cannabis currently presents a conundrum in need of bioethical rationale. Clinicians will recognize that pain can pose special challenges and, when intolerable, can drive patients to desperate measures. Seeking relief from the physical, psychological, or spiritual symptoms of disease is a natural instinct that contributes to the therapeutic uses of many substances, including cannabis. Beyond the pragmatics of dealing honestly and directly with patient choice, the remarkable safety profile of cannabinoids can give clinicians an added measure of confidence in recommending it for patients who are not achieving adequate analgesia with more conventional treatments, particularly those who suffer from neuropathies and other intractable pain conditions. The complexity of the evolving legal landscape for cannabinoid medicines will continue to require attention, and physicians should act accordingly by first acknowledging that the treatment of intolerable symptoms to provide humane relief is a noble task that society bestows upon its givers. The burgeoning industry's contributions to public health costs versus benefits are being analyzed at this time. Clinical decisions are based on our knowledge of the risks and benefits of available treatments, including those that have yet to receive full acceptance. Cannabis is currently undergoing a social process of medicalization, similar to what has been described with how contested illnesses come to be recognized as legitimate and within the domain of medicine. That process differentiates true medicinal cannabis use from drug abuse and is reflected in the various medical access laws and institutional initiatives such as professional organization endorsements. Of course, drug abuse is particularly significant and timely public health concern here in Kentucky as well as throughout the country. While the scarcity of clinical evidence for the medicinal use of cannabis poses a challenge for treatment decision-making, the expansive scope of chronic pain and frequency of opioid abuse suggests conventional treatments are insufficient. Public health trends contributing to the leading causes of preventable death needs to proactively address drug abuse, and there are important lessons learned from both tobacco and alcohol that need to be addressed. This particular slide, I'd like you to follow the dynamics of it as I progress through it, represents the last 15 years' assessments for leading causes of preventable death. As you can see, tobacco smoking is by far the largest. Way off to the right, you see drug abuse. That was as of back in 2004. Over the next 15 years, there were some changes that I want you to be aware of with trending, particularly concerning drug abuse, and perhaps to compare it to tobacco in this situation, because drug abuse has been going up for preventable deaths, as you know, and yet tobacco smoking is going down. That's a public health victory. Over these last 15 years then, lethal opioid overdoses, to bring this to your full attention, have now surpassed both motor vehicle collisions, as you can see on the bottom, and firearm deaths to be a leading cause of preventable deaths. That is a problem. So if we look at your Kentucky Department of Public Health, in order to develop responsible public and medical cannabis programs consistent with the Department of Public Health's mission, high-quality, evidence-based data is needed to facilitate healthcare's ongoing data-driven processes that are designed to ensure safer and more effective patient outcomes. The following 7 slides describe legislative innovations capable of empowering Kentucky's Department of Public Health's mission by providing processes from which to derive high-quality additional data needed to optimally develop a true medical cannabis program. The first of which is to develop responsible practitioner oversight by adopting an initial standard of care. In response to legislating the practice of medicine, developing standards of care is essential. A doctor remains potentially liable for ethics violations or malpractice committed while treating a qualifying medical cannabis patient. Yet well-intentioned physicians have little guidance given the dearth of extensive evidence-based data from which to make safe and effective patient care determinations. Even in states where cannabis is legal, ethical and practice liability concerns related to medical marijuana within a given state's formulary are a disincentive to practitioners rendering compassionate patient care. Kentucky and the federal government have yet to determine best practice guidelines required to define and govern the proper, safe, and effective use of medical cannabis. As such, the Kentucky Board of Medicine will be significantly challenged to establish minimum practice standard guidelines to determine or assess acceptable professional behavior by Kentucky's licensed practitioners. This results in uncertainty of how to assess a practitioner's performance when a complaint is filed with the board, leading to due process challenges, peer-reviewed testimonies, and significant time and resources for both the department and defending practitioner. Kentucky legislation then should seek to develop best practice guidelines by directing its practitioners and its Board of Medicine to adopt the standards as described in 10 practice standard expectations of physicians who see patients receiving medical cannabis. This was published by the Federation of State Medical Boards in 2016. Although Kentucky would establish the initial standards of care, practitioners who appeared to not comply with such standards and are subsequently brought to the attention of Kentucky's Board of Medicine should be entitled and to be accepting the current peer review processes consistent with the AMA Code of Medical Ethics opinions on due process and on peer review. The next item would be to enact continuous quality improvement metrics to mitigate unfavorable patient outcomes. Public health's concern and mission to ensure the health and safety of Kentucky's citizens. Best practice parameters aren't established yet for cultivation, processing, distribution, and security in this new arena. Beginning back in 1950, federal healthcare developed effective accreditation services ensuring quality improvement performance metrics that became requisite reimbursement by 1965's Medicare program. And ensuring ongoing development of performance goals is based on this methodology and is the accepted standard within all healthcare entities such as hospitals, pharmacies, and nursing homes. Good and bad patient outcomes are expected to occur as Kentucky's medical cannabis program develops. So continuous quality improvement focused accreditation will mitigate poor patient outcomes and should be included as a condition of license renewal. A requirement to successfully complete biennial accreditation will help develop and sustain best practice standards for growing, processing, and distributing cannabis products. All developing healthcare processes use these, what we call CQI, continuous quality improvement, metrics to determine performance parameters and goals. Ongoing evaluations based on continuous quality improvement performance metrics should be applied to provide oversight and are a reasonable expectation requisite to any license renewal. Duties of the department could be coordinated through a process that ensures quality improvement based on patient outcome data and these performance metrics as in all other healthcare entities. Creating such an environment promotes a healthy business competition among vested organizations and provides them with evidence of a lower risk profile to potentially decrease the bond obligation. Initially constrain qualifying conditions to those that have already have the support of high quality evidence-based data. While anecdotal reports supporting efficacy is mushrooming, as of about 2020, right now only a few conditions have evidence-based data demonstrating the therapeutic use of cannabis. High-quality assessments have accrued over the last 20 years, beginning with the Institute of Medicine report in 1999. This was an important study in that it was the first federally commissioned analysis having the benefit of understanding not simply if the chemicals in cannabis might help certain conditions. It followed a new understanding of just how these chemicals interface with our body's receptors, resulting in both therapeutic and side effects. Knowledge of this mechanism of action has greatly advanced our working knowledge of the potential clinical applications for cannabis-based medicines. 2017's federally commissioned extensive meta-analysis report of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine has determined that either substantial or conclusive statistically significant evidence-based data does currently exist, but only for a limited number of conditions at this time. More evidence-based data is needed and validates conditions for which promising anecdotal reports exist. Mechanisms should be provided to encourage data development and assessments that follow for the appropriate and prompt evaluation of additional qualifying conditions. Kentucky could choose to limit qualifying conditions to those currently enjoying the benefit of evidence-based data. To initiate an intentionally constrained Kentucky program that remains consistent with the supporting sciences as reported in that 2017 National Academies report. This meta-analysis, a state's responsibility then, would provide a cautious progressive program that would initially recognize 4 qualifying conditions as having the benefit of high-quality evidence-based data to support the medical use of cannabinoids as a treatment option. Now, those 4 items currently are intolerable nausea and vomiting, that has conclusive evidence. Intractable epilepsy has conclusive evidence. Intractable chronic pain has substantial evidence. And of note is pain in it itself is not a diagnosis. It is a symptom of many diseases and other diagnoses. And finally, intolerable muscle spasms, particularly from multiple sclerosis, which affects about 90% of those patients, also has substantial evidence. The next item would be to require the full and accurate labeling of all cannabis products to validate meaningful data. Complete accurate analysis of cannabis chemical content is not always apparent. Revealing all potentially bioactive chemicals found in cannabis is essential, and full labeling of any medicines needs to be readily available for the practitioner and patient alike seeking favorable outcomes. Most states currently fail to require the full disclosure of what are called terpenes, which have become increasingly important as their therapeutic potential is now being better understood. Full disclosure of all bioactive chemicals found in cannabis should be reliably available by responsibly labeling standardized products for the practitioner and patient alike, again, to assess for favorable patient outcomes. As healthcare's understanding of cannabis's component chemicals becomes better understood, an accurate analysis of the cannabis plant's full chemical content is critically important to both the healer and patient. I suggest that you ensure that the program's development includes ongoing funding of research to study the outcome in children, teens, and impaired driving. Because cannabis affects a developing young brain's neural circuitry, the consequences of contemporary cannabis use by youth is of great concern. While juvenile use of alcohol and tobacco has generally declined over the past 25 years, the use of cannabis products by 12th grade students in the United States is known to be rising. One of the few places where cannabinoid receptors, though, for a safety profile are not found is within a portion of the brainstems, what's called medulla and pons. These are the areas devoted to respiration. And this neuroanatomical advantage helps explain cannabis's lethal dose safety profile, even with its abuse. No respiratory depression fatal overdoses attributable only to cannabis have ever been documented. Stanford engineers, as we're talking about in California University, are developing a portable device that measures THC levels, the only psychotropic chemical in cannabis plant itself, and THC levels in saliva that bring law enforcement a step closer towards creating a roadside sobriety test for responsible driving, depending on the potential influence of marijuana. Rapidly confirming a driver's THC level along with a specific roadside physical skills coordination test designed to estimate impairment can allow law enforcement to assess threats to public safety. I suggest you promulgate regulations authorizing experts to modify qualifying conditions if indicated by data analyses. Recognizing the importance of ongoing research findings, Kentucky's 2020 legislation could provide authority to the Department of Public Health to consider future qualifying conditions based on the evolving evidence-based data. Innovative legislation would direct the Department of Public Health to designate a committee of healthcare experts, including public health experts, charged with assessing the current supporting science. Their mandate would include a timely response to structured citizen-patient petitions requesting consideration of additional qualifying conditions. As high-quality research becomes more plentiful, new diagnoses could be included, and conditions that are no longer supported by the data could be removed from the qualifying medical conditions list. It's important to resource highly qualified, safe dispensing guidance and a thoughtful processing of data. Dispensaries are the designated points of contact where a Kentucky patient could access cannabis products, yet the standards for training individuals serving patients in dispensaries and their qualification to guide patient care remain unspecified. Confounding patient care is that remarkably little is known about the effective cannabis dosing for most qualifying diseases. What is known is that chronic cannabis use contributes to changes in the body's own endocannabinoid receptors, and that this contributes to patient tolerance issues that compromise a practitioner's ability to determine a precise optimal therapeutic dose. Information shared at a dispensary is not only an educational opportunity for better patient care, it is also an opportunity to make assessments and gather research data. Eventually, upon cannabis's federal legalization, pharmacists will extend their responsible professional role in patient care. Until that time, collaborations with such highly skilled individuals is needed behind the counter, because that location extends, validates, and enhances the practitioner-patient relationship. This is a sensible opportunity to not only responsibly share healthcare advice, but also to gather that research data through that trained individual. Because healthcare practitioners, including pharmacists, public health experts, and epidemiologists, ultimately need to analyze the information derived from patient follow-up to learn about medical marijuana's effectiveness, detailed documentation concerning the amount and frequency of dosing and its delivery methods includes essential information to render responsible patient care. There is an essential need to collect meaningful data consistent with how patients actually use marijuana that helps determine the optimal dosing of cannabis. This information properly gathered and tracked will facilitate future research and development. So what's the take-home message? A clinician faced with a patient in intolerable pain has an obligation to not just feel compassion, but to do what is possible to alleviate that suffering without causing harm. As the limitations and risks of opioid options become more evident, the search for safe and effective solutions has rightfully included cannabinoid medicines. Despite barriers to research, randomized clinical trials provide substantial evidence of the analgesic potential of cannabinoids that confirm animal experiments, laboratory science, and what is known about the purpose of the endocannabinoid receptor system. As clinicians consider how to apply these discoveries, they may do well to heed the ethical standards physicians have historically promised to uphold, whether the Hippocratic oath to apply to the benefit of the sick all measures that are required, or that of the oath of Maimonides to seek the strength, time, and opportunity to correct acquired beliefs that extend the domain of knowledge. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Block is here as an expert. He's laid the foundation. We should have some questions for him. But the bottom line is he's laid out 7 things that must be that should be in a good medical marijuana program. Each of the 7 are in this bill. We'll be the first state to have the 7 of those things in this bill. Good packaging, good labeling, and so forth and so on. I'm sure there'll be a question of them later on. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to ask Eric Crawford to say a few words, and I'm going to talk briefly about the bill. Mr. Crawford?
This is about the Kentucky men and women that live in sick people in this state. I was talking to the mic. This represents the sick people of Kentucky. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak to you about House Bill 136. I will be brief. As you know, my name is Eric Crawford. In 1994, I was a passenger in an automobile accident that left me a quadriplegic. I also suffer an autoimmune issue called optical uveitis, which can ultimately lead to blindness. I am a lifelong resident of Mason County. I was born, raised, and live in Orangeburg, Kentucky. This is my home. I love Kentucky. I am Kentucky. I am viewed as a criminal in a state I love. I choose to use cannabis as my medicine instead of addictive opioids and other dangerous pharmaceuticals for my constant pain and ungodly muscle spasms. Narcotics make me out of my mind. They make me high and unable to function at all. I haven't had an opioid in over 6 years. Cannabis works better for me than what my doctors have to offer. Cannabis allows me to get out of bed and make the most of my life. I opt to use cannabis for my complicated vision issues. It has allowed me to come off of the horrendous autoimmune drugs that were destroying my liver and making me sicker. Cannabis is a self-preservation tool for the longevity of my life. All my well-respected Kentucky physicians, let me repeat that, Kentucky physicians recommend and totally support my use of cannabis to treat my many ailments. But again, I'm a criminal in the state. If House Bill 136, medical cannabis, were to pass and become law in Kentucky, I would not be a criminal. A lot of other people wouldn't be either. I would not have to live in fear. I would not have to lay awake at night worrying about the law enforcement coming to my home. I would not have to stress about going to jail or losing my home, farm, or freedom. My poor wife and mother could relax too. Living afraid is not conducive to good health. If House Bill 136 became law, I would have safe access to legal cannabis. So would other people. I would be a more productive member of society. So would other sick people. I would eliminate the uneasiness that I live with in regards to breaking the law. Please know I'm not the only sick person in Kentucky in this predicament. There are thousands of other sick people in our state that use cannabis medically and are considered lawbreakers. You think we're all criminals? There is 24.8 reduction in overdose deaths in states with legal medical cannabis. One person dies every 19 minutes from an FDA-approved drug. Not one person has ever died from cannabis in its natural form. What would you do if you had a lifelong illness? Cannabis helped you. Would you move to other 33 states that allow patients to auction illegal medical cannabis? Would you legally obtain cannabis and pray to God you wouldn't get in trouble for it? Would you be a criminal in this state? If it helps you. I'm here today to ask this committee to stand up and do the right thing. It is your moral duty to help those less fortunate than you. It is your job to enact laws for the betterment of sick Kentuckians. I am asking this committee to vote yes on House Bill 136 today. And I have something else to say. There's a reason I'm in this wheelchair. I believe in God. And God didn't do this to punish me. I'm a blessed man. He put me here so I could fight for other people's rights, other sick people, because they're scared or too sick to do it. But we're here to do it, to help people of Kentucky, the sick people. This ain't about nothing else but sick people. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
This bill backwards and forwards. I can go through it all, I won't unless I'm asked about it. I can go through it from the patient's perspective, the physician's perspective, the cultivator, the processor, the dispensary, the safety checker. I'll just highlight a few things. We've made a lot of changes that have been asked for, some that improve the bill and some that I don't like, but all with an effort to moving this thing forward. I want to highlight that there is no smoke in this bill. What we're trying to do is get this to as many, as Mr. Crawford said, as many sick people as we possibly can. As part of that, we have 13.5% of the money that comes in goes to an indigent program to try to get more access to our poor people. Obviously, insurance doesn't cover this, Medicare and Medicaid doesn't cover this. So we're asking part of the program is 13.5%. We're also going to ask all the contractors, all the folks seeking a license, as part of their application to show how they can assist in getting the products to folks who need it. 13.5% goes to local law enforcement to try to help make sure that nobody's misbehaving or those who are misbehaving who are caught. There's an opt-in, opt-out provision for local government. So if a county doesn't want it, they can opt out. If just to use an example, if Pulaski County doesn't want it, but Somerset does, Somerset can opt back in. So there's the opt-in, opt-out provision. And I want to say one more thing before I close, and that is, there's a lot of talk about federal law, and I think that's an important conversation here. But let me submit to you that since 2014, the United States Congress has passed something called the Rohrabacher-Farr rider to every appropriations bill. And what it says is that no Justice Cabinet dollar from federal government can be used to interfering with or impeding state medical marijuana programs at all. This is not the cold memo that we've heard about from the Obama administration that was rescinded. This is the United States Congress, both Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate, United States Congress passing the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, and it's, the Senate passed it again already this year. The process isn't done. But I think it's not completely accurate to say that such a program would be in contradiction of federal law because of that rider in the appropriation. And let me close just real quickly, if I will, and it's this. Thank you. And I'm going to answer any questions, as I said, but I want to speak to you really quickly, not as a legislator. I want to talk to you as a man. I want to talk to you as a husband and a father, a brother, a son, a nephew, an uncle, a cousin, a friend. This is right. This is good. When I'm campaigning, a lot of folks have heard me say this. I knocked on an 85-year-old man's doors, Republican, 6'4". He comes to the door and I say, my name is Jason Nemes, I'm your state rep running for re-election. And he stops me and says, aren't you guy that's pushing that marijuana? And I get defensive when I get ready to have to defend my argument. He's a 6'4", 6'5", big old fella, and he says, and I'm not going to tell you, Representative Lewis, that he starts tearing up. I'm going to tell you the dude started weeping. And he told me a story about his wife, that she couldn't get off the couch because she was wasting away in cancer treatment. And they have 2 sons, and one of them brought medical marijuana to his mother. He's admitting to being a criminal, Eric, to a state representative who you never met before. And he told me what it meant for his wife to have her life back for the last little bit of her life. as he's weeping, never met me before. I'm at a fundraiser last anecdote I'll show. I'm at a fundraiser. 41-year-old man comes up to me, never met him before in my life. We're at a St. Margaret Mary fundraiser where my boys go to school. He's 41, he comes up to me and says, he's trembling. This happens almost every day in the halls of Frankfurt. But he's trembling, and he says, "Are you Jason Nemes?" He says, "Yes, sir, what's on your mind?" I could tell he was emotional. And he says, Thank you for letting me be a father. Because I've got multiple sclerosis. And I use medical marijuana a couple times a week. Illegally, he knows. He's admitting to a felony to his representative. And he says that it allows me to go to work. Like Eric was saying. It allows me to be a father and provide for his children. So what I'm asking here today is we've got a bill that's tight. In my view, too tight, but it's tight. It's strong. We don't want to, we've got big barriers erected between what this would allow and misconduct. But I'm asking you as a human being, when you cast your vote, think of this question. If a physician told you today that your wife had cancer, and that because of her pain or because she couldn't eat or nausea, that marijuana might help her, or if a physician, your child's neurologist told you today that your son has a condition that medical marijuana would help. My question, please think of this question when you cast your vote. What would you do? I would break the law in a New York minute. I've never smoked marijuana in my life. I've never used an illegal drug. But I'd break the law in a second, and I would submit that every single person up there would do the same. So when you cast your vote, I think you're voting for whether or not people that will be in that hypothetical situation would continue to be criminals or not. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have, this is not one of those sessions. I understand the support, that's why you're here, and some cons, that's why you're here, but this is not that type of session. This is for information back and forth, so legitimate decisions to be made, just like Representative Nemes just described. I have Mr. Carter, or Ms. Carter, C.J. Carter, that signed up to speak.
Should we take any questions now or later?
Later.
Yes, sir.
Going once. Going twice. Also have Gene Cole signed up to speak. Come on up. Dr. Block, would you mind letting Mr. Cole have a seat so we can get him on the microphone and understand what he's saying? If you will, state your name for the record, please, and I'll swear you in.
Gene Cole, with the Kentucky Ethics League, Kentucky League on Alcohol and Gambling.
Thank you. Will you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Please take a seat and proceed.
Thank you for allowing me to speak today. I would encourage y'all, everyone, to support the House Concurrent Resolution 5, which is encouraging Washington, D.C. to allow for safety and efficacy of medical marijuana.
Let me interrupt for just a moment. I've got you registered to speak on this bill, House Bill 136. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you.
And I'm getting ready to speak on that too. I am against House Bill 136 because there are some things that it's going to be hard to control. In an interview from the Kentucky Today morning briefing dated January 15th, 2020, Mr. Nemes spoke about chronic pain. He's saying that the chronic pain in this bill needs to be, it has to have an underlying condition. But yet, on page 4 of the bill, starting at line 20, it says qualifying medical conditions means, if you go on down to line 24, it just has chronic pain. There is no caveat or anything there saying that must be associated with other conditions. It just says chronic pain. So that could be construed as anything.
Understood, I just wanna make sure I clarify.
Medical
Is that in the original bill or is that in the committee sub, Representative Nemes?
It's not in the committee sub, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
the committee sub that's been adopted does not include that, just making it clear.
Yes, that is in the original bill that I have access to. I have not been able to get access to the substitute. Okay. And then he spoke about the medical marijuana card. I'm the one, hopefully everybody in the legislature received an email from the Kentucky League, had an email talking about problems with medical marijuana, and there were several videos attached. And hopefully everybody took a chance to review them and read some of the stuff. But one of the things I pointed out was the medical marijuana card program in Colorado, based on studies from Colorado. The average patient for Colorado was male, 40 years of age, and chronic pain was the underlying condition for issuing the card. If you look in this room, I'm not sure about the overflow room because I don't know who all's over there. But in this room, the majority of it's male. And if you average the age, you're probably coming up close to 40 years old. This is not a prescription program. A doctor cannot write a prescription like you normally get for flu medicine or other type of medicine. All you get is a note from the doctor that says, in their opinion, based on the bona fide relationship with the patient, they would benefit from the use of marijuana. The doctor does not control the amount of marijuana, so as much as, like the dosage of 25 milligrams a day or whatever, average prescribed. He can't specify the strain of marijuana, because as we all know, there are multiple different strains, and every one of them have varying THC contents. Back in the 80s, the strain to get was Columbia Gold. Now, it's Purple Kush, Sour Diesel, or something else. They cannot control that. A dispensary. Yes, there is provisions in the bill saying that the dispensary agents must have training. But there are not any, from what I understand, there are not any accredited degree programs for marijuana. Now, there are programs that talk about marijuana and they train them, but it's not an accredited program, and they don't really get into the chemical breakdowns. Being able to separate out the CBD and the THC and the other compounds found in marijuana. So, while there is training, there's still a lot of unknowns. Out in Seattle, and I'm sure y'all have heard on the radio, they have a homeless problem out there. And one of the videos I shared highlights that. Within the last 2 days, it's been reported that the city of Seattle has told the homeowners, landowners, people that are renting to other people, not to evict people because of the cold weather. They don't want to put people out on the street. Whether or not they're helping the people that could possibly face eviction to try to recover and not be evicted is unknown. But they're telling the homeowners, penalizing the homeowners by saying don't evict these people because it's too cold outside for them.
Against that?
In Colorado and Washington State and Canada, as we know, all three of those have recreational marijuana and some form of medical. But the black market has increased. It has not decreased at all. Black market marijuana sales have increased. And Kevin Sabat, who spoke 2 years ago in 2018 to the interim House Licensed Occupation Committee, he still is against marijuana, against medical marijuana in forms as it is now. The U.S. Surgeon General has published a paper opposing the use of marijuana as it is. And now this is just my own observation. The push for marijuana to be legalized, I see as a response and pushback to the opioid crisis. Because, and it's being blamed in the pharmaceutical industry for causing the opioid crisis. I see it as a pushback because the way these programs are going, they're working around federal law which totally bans marijuana, but they say, and there are studies that prove marijuana works, but it needs to come from the federal government.
Just real quick, just making you aware of time constraints. I've got
Yeah,
two other people, if not three, that are signed up to speak, and I'm working on whether they're going to speak right now, so I'm making you aware.
I'm just, two more things.
All right, thank you.
In the email I sent out earlier, in Colorado, and I pointed this out in the email, in Colorado, they spend $4.50 of the state budget for every dollar earned on the marijuana program. That $4.50 goes to the policing, cleanup, and other issues that are created by marijuana. So the state is losing $3.50 over what it's bringing in. And the medical marijuana is only 0.9% of the state budget. And lastly, as we have seen with the vaping crisis, there's issue about being contaminated with vitamin E acetates and different things. Some people got them from legal vape shops, but yet they still wind up sick. And when they tested the product, it is what they found. It came from a legal shop, so there's no guarantee that you can have a safe without going through the FDA and all of its safety protocols and being able to go through a regular pharmacy. And with that, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I have a Joe Trigg that has signed up to speak. Can you step up, please?
He comes up, Mr. Chairman, it'll take 10 seconds.
To speak?
Yep. While he's walking up here.
Right after this. You'll notice that some members are coming in and out, and we may have some that are missing. We have at least 2 other committees that are going on at the same time, and there are multiple bills being presented, so we share members on those committees. So don't take it as a sign of anything when people are coming in and out. They're just having to cover their duties, all right? Your comment?
I appreciate my friend's comments just now. I do want to correct one thing. As I look around the room, 50% of the people in here are mothers and sisters and daughters. They're women. They're not just men. And even if they were men, why do you think so many folks, so many men of 40-year-old support this? Because they're veterans. They went and they fought for us. They've died for us. They've bled and hurt for us. And it's time for us to stand up for them. By the way, the veterans organizations in Kentucky are supportive of House Bill 136.
Yes, we are.
Trigg? Can you state your name for the record, and then I'll swear you in?
All right. Joe Tree.
Okay, we raise your right hand. Swear or affirm to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Proceed.
I'm gonna read my comments and I'll try to be faster than the last individual. First, I'd like to thank this committee for allowing me to express my views on House Bill 136. My name is Joe Trigg. I'm a 30-year veteran with 15 deployments and over 8 different war zones. Thousands of other veterans and myself would benefit from this bill. House Bill 136 is being touted as the tightest medical marijuana legislation in the country, which is the same statement every other state said when they legalized their medical marijuana program. I was hoping that Kentucky's House Bill 136 would be touted as the most logical medical marijuana legislation in this country. If history is the barometer, the tighter the laws, the higher the price, the larger the black market. Essentially, prohibition for those who most desperately need it. House Bill 136 is full of oxymorons, so let's follow the money and look at how lobbyists both in and out of the state own this bill. All through the bill, it says medical marijuana will not be grown or smoked by cardholders. Dispensaries can sell cardholders flyers marked not intended for consumption by smoking. This is what the bill stating you're not even supposed to smoke it in your own home or personal residence without the possible penalty of a $100 fine. What's wrong with cardholders being able to grow 1 to 6 plants for smoking and use in their own homes versus buying at dispensaries? Let's just follow the money. I'm from Barron County, one of the top ag counties in the state. I think I speak for the other 119 counties when I say no farmer will benefit from this bill. The tier system for cultivation, even without the addition of a special category called producer, can only benefit large corporate farmers. The 18 cultivator/producer licenses could add up to about 900,000 square feet in greenhouse production with the option of expansion. This could easily be 300 farmers with tier 1 2,500 square foot greenhouses, or about 3 farms per county. The University of Kentucky has fully documented the benefits of a shared quota system as a tax and income multiplier for every county and this state. Dollars would still flow out and up versus this proposed top-down system. Ask the people of Illinois what happened to them when they used this same setup for their medical bill. They later on had to add on their recreational bill a provision which limited the size of greenhouse operations and mandated minority opportunities. Just as another oxymoron, no other agricultural product is treated this way. Let's follow the money. Counties and cities will have the option to opt out and then petition back in with the ability to leverage some additional fees on all cannabis businesses in their area. How many counties in the state of Kentucky still have wet or dry alcohol restrictions? Sooner or later, we have to establish a Kentucky Cannabis Commission or committee. This group would coordinate relative responsibilities between the public health, the ABC, and the Department of Agriculture. Just yesterday, the House had to vote on another bill trying to save the hemp industry. Again, this could have been voted with a cannabis commission. In closing, I support the legalization of medical marijuana for the estimated 60,000 plus Kentuckians who would benefit from it. House Bill 136 can do better and should do better now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also have signed up to speak today Kent Ostrander in the room. You will introduce yourself for the record on the minister of oath.
Kent Ostrander, County Foundation.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and distinguished members of this panel. These are the kind of bills that make you earn every dime that you get paid. I appreciate your work on this and the hard work already tested to by the fact that this would be the tightest bill in all the states. So I greatly commend you on that. I'd like to begin with saying that good men and good women can disagree, and it's okay when that happens. And I think there are a lot of good men and good women in this room, both behind these panels here and behind me. Family Foundation believes that there is medicine in the marijuana plant, in the cannabis plant. We just want to make sure that the good in the plant can be extracted and the bad can be removed. Most people in this room would agree with that. But do we fully know what's in the cannabis plant? Just 10 days ago, CNN reported that a new compound had been found in the cannabis plant, 30 times more potent than THC. That of course, is the most psychoactive compound in the plant. In that same report, they reported that Italian scientists had found a second compound, CBDP, that was new, that they hadn't seen. So the plant, without doubt, is rich in compounds. Medical professionals must rely on evidence-based research in order to properly prescribe any medication. We cannot use anecdotal-based assumptions. Anecdotal assumptions can lead you to the truth, and they can have some truth to them, but always evidence-based science must be used when it comes to medication. That's my first question. The second is the Alcoholic Beverage Commission the best oversight and regulatory agency? It's been tasked for years with regulating recreational and social beverages, and all of a sudden it's being asked to oversee the intricacies of medication. They don't even regulate mixed drinks and alcohol. But they're all of a sudden going to handle medications. That seems like a very large task for them to do. This bill actually circumvents the federal government. What we want is cannabis to be studied. So we want the federal government to step back and release studies, back to the aforementioned House Concurrent Resolution 5, because we want everyone to get the medications that they want and need, but doing so in a safe manner. Medical professionals can prescribe cannabis, but because there's no substantive studies in exactly how it interacts with other medications, they can be in error. Every advertisement that we see of medications on the TV always has some fast talk at the end saying, don't use this, don't use that, and so happens. But there's none of that that's been researched on the cannabis plant. As we all know, and this is anecdotal, it does have some downsides. We're all told that young people can have their brain development damaged by the use of cannabis. And there are some who suffer from schizophrenia and bipolar disorders that can have psychotic episodes. I'm just saying there's some downsides. We believe there's medication in it, and that's what we desire to see come forth for everybody as soon as possible. What we don't want to see is unleashed another mistake, if I can be kind to call the opioid crisis a mistake. Let me touch base on that. Marijuana has been around for a long time. So have opioids. Opioids were used in Coca-Cola in the 1800s.
Not synthetic.
And they were used for babies teething in the 1900s.
Marijuana doesn't kill people.
Several things converged which are now credited for the opioid crisis, and one was the World Health Organization established the pain ladder, and doctors began to assess pain as a vital sign. In 1980, the Porter and Jick letter was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. It was a report of a simple survey done by 2 doctors simply using the charts from inpatients in the Boston General Hospital. Their findings were that inpatients who did not have previous addiction had less than 1% chance of developing addiction from the inpatient opioid use. Unfortunately, the study did not follow the patients after they left the hospital, nor did it assess them directly. Nevertheless, the letter was published and it was heralded as a landmark study by a hopeful media and cited as the basis for prescribing freely. The manufacturer then produced a more potent form and told his drug representatives to tell prescribing doctors it was safe and effective with less than 1% chance of addiction. Yes, those were anecdotal reports. There were anecdotal reports that many benefited by it, but there's been significant harm. I want to conclude by simply saying those who have testified for this legislation have done an outstanding job. At least two of the folks that have sat up here have been in my office at least once. They're good and sincere people. They need to be heard. We just want to put down a marker to say, be cautious. And thank you for all the work that you have done.
Thank you. I have no one else signed up that's requested to speak. Representative Nemes, do you have any? Sorry?
Mr. Carter.
Okay, called earlier. That's fine. If you will, approach, please. Thank you for speaking up. If you will introduce yourself for the record, please, and I'll finish the vote.
Good afternoon, I'm C.J. Carter.
Mr. Carter, will you raise your right hand and swear or affirm to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, my fellow Kentuckians. This is actually a somewhat of a surreal moment for me as I grew up in this neck of the woods, 837 Colonial Trace, actually right down the street from here, not too far. As I graced the hallways of Elkhorn Elementary and Elkhorn Middle School once upon a time. But I'm here today to share with you the relationship that I have with Miss Mary Jane and the positive effects that the plant has had on my life. It's kind of funny because the relationship that I have with marijuana actually started at my 8th grade graduation party, which was not too far from here, right off of East Main Street, 20 years ago, back in 1998. So fast forward 20 years to 2 weeks before Father's Day of 2018, I ended my relationship with Miss Mary Jane because my wife despised it. She can't stand the smell, so I quit cold turkey. 2 weeks after that, while on vacation at Grable Flies in Cincinnati, Ohio, my wife, my 3-year-old son, and my teenage niece witnessed me having the first seizure of my life. 2 weeks after that, I had another seizure. A few weeks after that, I had another seizure. The last 6 months of 2018, I had 7 seizures and was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I have to assume that I have been medicating myself since my 8th grade graduation party, not knowing the condition that lay within my brain. I always thought that I was invincible, but clearly that wasn't the case. I made it through all of 2019 seizure-free after I resumed my relationship with Mary Jane and also renewed with CBD. You know, I thought I had conquered the ailment, but I was clearly wrong again because I've had 6 seizures since this past Christmas, with my last one happening this last Thursday. Now, my story and my life journey has led me here to be a cannabis advocate, a cannabis activist, as well as a cannabis entrepreneur with ventures in the hemp industry. I'm also currently the Kentucky chapter president of Minorities for Medical Marijuana, which is a national nonprofit, currently serving in 25 states, working with legislators to implement laws that create a fair and equitable cannabis industry. Because let's face it, the current cannabis laws that are in place are doing more harm than good. An African-American male born in 2001 has a 32% chance in his lifetime of being in prison, whereas that same age group for a Hispanic male is 12%. Same age group for a white male is 6%. So, I'm here to discuss with you House Bill 136, how do we make it the best that it can be? In reading through the newest version of the bill, it's difficult to discern the fundamental principles of this legislation, but I can tell you what's clearly not. In one word, diversity. Where are the diversity measures in this bill? Where does it address in this bill the individuals and communities who have been most adversely affected by the war on drugs? Will this legislation help the racial disparities that are in our current criminal justice system? In reading through the legislation last night, I came across 0, none whatsoever. And I know for myself, I've had several run-ins with law enforcement throughout my 35 years of life. And some have been very, very, very traumatic for me, being that, you know, I feel like I'm an upstanding citizen. I like to say that where's the public input from patients, from medical professionals, from entrepreneurs, or from industry experts? Where's the outreach when it comes to this bill to go out into the communities to see what would work best for us? I know that Kentucky's known for a few things. It was once upon a time known for tobacco. known for horse racing, and of course it's known for bourbon. And since I am an entrepreneur and I have traveled with my business, I can tell you that there are several individuals across this country who want to get a piece of this Kentucky market for the simple fact that this is going to be an international grandstand here in Kentucky when it comes to marijuana due to the limestone that we have beneath our feet. Of course, it's going to make it a premium product on an international level when it does become legalized, because it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when. But I just want to applaud all of you for being here today. A lot of people have their eyes on what's going on here today, so I'm minding, hopefully, that you guys can step up and serve us like you should, because as I said, medical marijuana is my medicine and I use it proudly. So I do want to thank you guys for the time I did this for.
Thank you very much. I see no other person signed up to ask the request to speak. Representative Nemes, do you have any brief remarks before we go? I will have one question.
Yes, sir.
Member.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make 4 very quick points. I want to thank Mr. Carter for coming here today. I don't disagree with hardly anything that he said. As yourself, Mr. Chairman, understands, we have a lot of bills to deal with criminal justice reform this session that we support. We're not doing nearly enough. We need to pass House Bill 6, I believe. That's Representative Booker's bill to get people back on the voting rolls. And so there's a lot more we need to do, and a lot more that we're doing under with your leadership, Mr. Chairman. This bill is not about that. It's about getting this medicine to everybody in Kentucky. We are doing other things for racial disparities, and we need to do even more. I agree with that. I want to thank Mr. Carter for being here. With respect to patients, Representative Sims and I feel like a lot of times that's all we do is we talk to patients and physicians to try to get this thing right. I do want to note this committee substitute puts the program in the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, the Department of Health. The previous version was in the alcohol beverage control just because of logistical issues, and the previous governor wanted it there. But this is in the Cabinet for Health and Family Services now. And 2 last points. One is we have in this bill, which was not in the bill before, it was in the bill that Representative Sims filed a couple years ago, but not last year's, and it is now. And that is that there is a portion of the funds goes to scientific research, and it'll be a Kentucky University. Hopefully that's the Hilltoppers of Western, they get that, but it'll go to a Kentucky University to research this program. And then finally, I want to note, and I'm very, very proud of this, one of the organizations that I care about, and I think most of you care about more than any of all, is the Kentucky League of Cities. It touches all of us. The mayors and the council persons are all elected. This morning, I'm happy to note, with permission from them, this morning the Kentucky League of Cities endorsed House Bill 136. They know what their communities want. They understand what we go through as elected officials. They know what's right, and they endorsed it. I won't say the vote, but let me just say it was overwhelming support. So that's the last thing I want to say, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I have Representative Lewis. Do you still have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Nemes, Representative Sims, thank you for your leadership and your efforts. Eric, we've had many discussions. You've been in my office several times. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your advocacy. Dr. Block, I do have a question, and I thank you for coming here today. I run several businesses, but one of them is a community pharmacy. And to me, patient care and patient safety is it's the utmost concern. You have to focus on that. So when we talk about House Bill 136, how does it compare to legislation that has been passed in other states in terms of safety and control?
Thank you, Representative Lewis. I started following this, actually going back to the mid-1990s when California was the first state to adopt a medical law. And since then, of course, now we're up to 33 other states. All of those laws, because they're dealing with something that's federally legal, put physicians in the middle of a discussion that is challenging for physicians to do the right thing. So I've looked, particularly since my home state of Florida adopted its first laws several years ago, and started approaching it by thinking of it truly as a medical bill. Now, no offense, legislators, thank you for promulgating this. However, physicians hate to be legislated the practice of what we do by non-physicians. That should make sense. The point I'm going to make here is that in being critical of other states not necessarily approaching this from that platform, I started and discussed with Representative Nemes the importance of patient outcome. and how there is a balance of sensible legislation of measures that can be added to legislation. A few states have some of the components that we've discussed, or I discussed earlier today. None have all. And I'd be comparing one state to the other by telling you that if we were going to look at those measures promoting a potential favorable patient outcome, that the bill in front of you today surpasses any states that I know of legislation proposed thus far. I also regard this as being more consistent with whatever that federal standard is determined upon the repeal of federal prohibition. So in that sense, and this is not so much an endorsement as much of a reality statement from a clinician, a practitioner, this paves the way potentially for better patient outcomes. Everything in medicine are driven from the metrics that are included in such processes, as I mentioned about accreditation before. And that, to your credit, is why I'm pleased to be here today and presenting all 7 of the ideas that I shared with you, each one that was accepted by the representative here. And finally, in conclusion with that, understanding that there is a better way to approach this, you may notice now that compared to previous versions of the bill, the word marijuana is not there anymore. Marijuana is a mongrel word. It started and it has political relevance, but it has really no medical significance. The true word is cannabis, and that word has been substituted in the bill throughout.
Thank you. Excellent answer. More questions, Mr. Chairman? Thank you.
Thank you. I have no more questions. I have one more question, Representative Mosier. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of concerns just about the research piece of this, and I do appreciate what you've done with this bill. I think we're getting closer to just appropriately looking at this as, I don't want to call it a research project, but it's certainly a popular national social experiment right now, and I think it's a medical experiment because this isn't being put through the FDA approval process, which all other natural products and plants are. I think without serious questions being answered, we're not really sure that we're doing no harm. I think that we don't have clear answers to the indications. We don't clearly know how to dose this medication. It's not a medication yet, but I'm sure that there are medicinal properties, and I think that we just need a little bit more clarity. I've spoken with lots of physicians about this who have concerns about really more about contraindications, and I guess a lot of what we hear are from oncologists and end-of-life situations, and certainly in some respects I think that should be allowed, but we don't know how this interacts with chemotherapy, for example. So I just, that's just one example of a lot of questions. I could keep us here all day. I won't do that, but I think that we need to focus more on research. That's what the AMA says. It's what all of the medical groups that I talk to and affiliated with say. And to your point about legislating medical practice, doctors don't like that. And I'm not sure that legislators should really be in the business of voting on medications. Are there other medications that we should vote on? Dr. Block?
Are there other medications we should vote on?
Yeah.
Sorry, but I don't understand.
Well, I mean,
question.
this is a plant, and it's being called a medication without going through the usual process.
Pill
I'm
mill
just wondering,
regulations.
are there other medications and other treatments that legislators should
Certainly.
prescribe?
I made great point of expressing the word medicalization in my
She's
presentation,
trying to trap him.
which means that we don't have all the
She's got
answers.
somebody writing
Myself as a
questions for her.
clinician regard this purely as a patient outcome. Everything in medicine, as an anesthesiologist, I deal with medicines far more dangerous than cannabis, including fentanyl, you've probably heard a lot about. We do so in a balanced risk reduction sensibility, with the sensibility of harm mitigation. We're not there to make things more dangerous, just the opposite. The reality of it is there are other medications that are other Schedule I substances, and the difference in many of those, including LSD I might add, is that certain medications we don't know how they work. In this case, cannabis is different because in the mid-1990s, how it works was discovered. The timing of how the first state came on board after that, the timing of it expresses the relevance of the understanding of this medicine compared to others in that context. And with respect to your comment about experiments, that's exactly what states do. In this case, with it being federally legal and with citizen patient mandates from other states, the states themselves are these proving grounds. Is it entirely experimental? I wouldn't think so at this point at all, because we do know how it works. But there is a learning curve, that's why I used the medicalization term, and that process is meant to continue with certain constraints that everybody may not like, but to continue independent of a federal designation that right now has stayed stagnant for the many years, almost 25, since the discovery of how this works has been frustrating for many citizen patients, and they've asked their own states to act on their behalf, partly through the experimental process, but the federal government will have their eyes on Kentucky and more recent states adopting measures, because we're finally finding our way through that medicalization process with a better safety and efficacy understanding and hopefully due process.
Mr. Chairman, I want to answer that question if I might. The answer is yes. Opioids are a medicine, and 3 years ago, we passed a bill that limited opioids in the prescription. We restricted the doctor's practice. And to my knowledge, Representative Moser, you were the sponsor of that bill.
If I could just comment quickly, I intend to continue my work with the federal delegation to lift any restrictions, to provide more opportunity for research waivers. I think that's the direction that we should head, and you know, I don't disagree, like I said, that there are probably medicinal qualities. I know there are, but we need to appropriately dose and know what those indications are and the contraindications. Thank you.
And I'll just say, I appreciate those comments from the medical standpoint. I'm not sure that our purpose and goals are contrary to what I'm saying in the bill and what's being discussed. It's how we get there is what I keep hearing, and I do appreciate that perspective. Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Nemes, on page 21 of the bill, there is the restriction on smoking marijuana, but in section 3B of that same page says that the odor or smell of cannabis shall not constitute evidence of use or consumption of cannabis by smoking. What evidence can we obtain other than the smell, unless we witness the smoking, observe the smoking directly? What other evidence can we use to establish that somebody has been smoking marijuana?
Why do you need to use it?
The product smells in ways other than just smoking. And I've never smoked marijuana, never used it, so I'm not an expert on this.
That's why I asked, I'm not an expert
Right.
either.
But there's a no combustion in the bill. You have a marijuana smell in other ways as well. And so and so your question, I want to answer your question directly.
Sheriff's Association, probably.
What will the police officer know effectively, mostly on the street, if it's a legal product? So what this bill does is it says that you have to have it in packaging. The packaging will be from the dispensary, and it has to be in packaging at all times. So if an officer came to a car and pulled them over for speeding or whatever, and they had suspicions that, let's say it was on the passenger seat, and they saw the medical cannabis, they would have to have, one, be able to produce a card immediately, and that would be a presumption, but not definitive, obviously. But then any product that's in the car has to be in the container. If it's not in the container, they're breaking the law. They don't have protections under this bill. It has to be in the packaging that they receive from the dispensary. And so what we're trying to do there is we're trying to say, we're trying to limit the over-criminalization of the process, and say if I get pulled over and I'm a patient that's already been approved and so forth, present my card, show the product, and it must be in the packaging. I think that's enough protections. We talked to law enforcement on that, and I think they were, provided that we had the packaging in there, and we've tightened that up. I think that satisfied them.
Is law enforcement in favor of this now?
The sheriffs, the chiefs of police, and the Kentucky State Police are neutral on this bill right now.
They should be.
We're trying to get them to favor it when it goes over to the Senate. But right now they're neutral.
One more question then. A doctor, you stated, I think you testified that we are close to developing tests for impairment, THC impairment. How close are we, and what would you consider to be a level of THC that impairs somebody's driving?
The levels will differentiate, nothing, because one individual user's impairment may be totally different than another's. There's tolerances that develop in one user versus another, such that the same blood level, for instance, might not correlate. But those tests, and at Stanford University from about 2 and 3 years ago, we're testing saliva samples specifically for THC, but then the key is coupling it with a roadside coordination test, looking for specific things unique perhaps to cannabis, even different from what you might find with alcohol. And those are under further development, but this has been an ongoing concern for the last 15 years in the states which have legal programs. It's not a final product yet, but the law enforcement in states where those kind of things are starting to be adopted are being finer tuned every week. And so to answer your question, there is no particular serum level like you could draw from an alcohol or a breathalyzer test that would correlate with impairment the way we currently recognize alcohol. But the concerns that you're bringing up are very well respected, and they're being hopefully rectified by new developments of technologies coordinated with those physical tests. Further than that, I don't believe there is any definitive test for law enforcement to do when they pull over somebody.
Can you detect any level of THC by blood test?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So-
THC, these medicines and cannabinoids, they're actually fat soluble. That's different than almost all of the other medicines we have. So they get sequestered and held in fat, not necessarily released then to cause impairment. The majority of the impairment occurs just during the initial few minutes to hours. But in terms of other blood tests for it, not detected in blood, the problem's the same though as from the saliva. They don't necessarily correlate with impairment.
More. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under current Kentucky law, any amount of a controlled substance that's found in your bloodstream is a violation, and you are driving is considered impairment. Is the fact that we're allowing this now, does that change that law? And I'll ask Representative Nemes whether this would be a controlled substance would still be a controlled substance under our traffic laws.
So in this bill, it would, use of it in compliance with this program is not a violation of the law.
But I guess that's my issue here. Under the driving laws, under the DUI laws, any amount of controlled substance that you test for, you're in violation, if I'm not mistaken.
And you wouldn't out here, but I would note that.
Are you giving immunity under the traffic, from any traffic violation by allowing this?
If you are inebriated and you're driving, you're gonna be held accountable under the law. If you're not driving carelessly and you're using the product in compliance with this program, then it's not a violation of the law.
I disagree with that, but
Let me just pull it over an analogy real quick, and maybe an issue has to be solved later on. But as we are situated currently in Kentucky, you can be found guilty of driving under the influence if you have something inhibiting your ability to drive, and that something might be a prescription drug traditionally understood. And I think the question is getting at, even if this is not a prescription drug, it is an authorized drug. Why would it be treated any differently than any other prescription drug from which you can receive a DUI? For instance, 70-year-old grandmother, prescription drugs, driving. I've represented some of those.
So if I could, to put some actual language on there, in page 7, it's the subsection 2 at the top of page 7. It notes what I just said, that if you're using the program, if you're using the product in compliance with the program and you're not you're not driving, in a way that shows impairment, then, it's not a violation of the Kentucky law. To say otherwise would say that anybody in the program is not allowed to drive, because cannabis can stay in the body for a long time. And I must say also, I should say this, hemp, which I don't think anybody ever voted against, hemp is also can stay in your body. I've represented clients before the Board of Nursing and others where they've had THC in their body, but that was defined as hemp. That is not a violation of law.
Much like the scenario I'm talking about with prescription medication.
Yes, sir.
Just because you have prescription medication and you're driving doesn't make you DUI. There has to be a second factor of you are inhibited in your ability to drive.
It's a better way to put it, Mr. Chairman.
And I'm basically asking whether that specifically preempts or overrides KRS 189010, section 1C.
I think it does, Representative Fisher. I mean, and I haven't read that.
That immunity you're giving in this statute, is that?
Well, we can call it immunity. What I would like to say is if you're using the product in compliance with the program, then if so long as that you're not driving while you're inebriated, then it's not a violation of law. So if I haven't read that statute, and the devil's in the, you're a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, the devil's in the details, I want to look at that statute clearly. But I also want to say very clearly to Kentucky right now, as they're watching on KET, if you have a medical marijuana card, medical cannabis card, and you're driving in a way that's not inebriated, that is not a violation of law. I will read the bill again very closely, and if I think that's even in question, we'll have a full amendment to the point.
And that was going to be my next question. So are we agreed, if I'm hearing this correctly, and we're agreed on the principle that if you are driving impaired,
Right.
whether that be by traditional prescription medication,
Right.
or whether that be through authorized medicinal cannabis under this bill, the impairment is still illegal and will be treated as such under Kentucky law before and after this bill.
No doubt about it, Mr. Chairman.
And a full amendment would be appropriate if there's question about that language.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other questions, there's already been a motion and a second on the bill. Madam Secretary, will you call the roll on HB 136 as amended by House Committee Sub that was adopted prior?
Representative Blanton? Representative Booker?
Very brief explanation, please.
Briefly, please.
I just want to commend all of my colleagues here for coming together to help push this once again. Eric, I want to say that you are not a mistake. Your testimony is not a mistake. You're here for a reason, and so am I, and I'm going to vote yes.
Representative Bratcher?
Can I shortly explain my vote?
Briefly, please.
You know, there's a lot of boxes, there's a lot of medicine in a doctor's toolbox, and a lot of it is dangerous. I don't see any reason to keep this out of there under a doctor's care, so I vote yes. Thank you.
Representative Cantrell? Yes. Representative Elliott? Aye. Representative Fisher? Representative Harris?
I'd like to explain my vote briefly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I vote yes, and as somebody who's never smoked a cigarette, never taken any kind of drug whatsoever, I see this as a useful tool in the toolbox, as previously said, for doctors, and an awesome option for people who don't want to be addicted to narcotics. I vote yes. Thank you.
Representative Hatton?
Briefly explain my vote, Mr. Chair.
Briefly. Thank you for using a different microphone.
Okay, how's that? So recognizing that compromises were made, that we've seen various iterations of this bill, and that changes might still be necessary as we try our best to craft the perfect bill. But also recognizing that there are sick and suffering Kentuckians, that there are PTSD sufferers, that there are epileptic Kentuckians, that there are opioid addicted Kentuckians. It's time that we join the 33 states that have already legalized medicinal marijuana, and the first one being 24 years ago. It's time. 90% of Kentuckians are asking for this legislation, and it's time that we listen to them. So for all of them, and for Eric Crawford in particular, it's time. My vote is yes.
Representative Hoover? Representative Kulkarni?
Briefly explain my vote.
Briefly.
I'd like to thank all the advocates, Mr. Crawford, and all the advocates in this room and the overflow room for their hard work and their many trips to Frankfurt to educate and raise awareness on this issue. I'd like to thank the sponsors of this bill. I think it's a good step. I do want to quickly point out that the prohibitions that we have on marijuana were put in place in the early 1900s, in no small part due to their association with Mexican migrants and the attitudes of this country towards them at that time, less to do with any medical detrimental impact of the actual plant. I think we do need more study, but I want to point that out. I am voting yes today, but I just wanted to make sure I also pointed out that I do share the concerns of Mr. Trigg and Mr. Carter that spoke here today with regard to it seems like the favoring of corporate interests over minority communities and small farmers in Kentucky. But I will vote yes for this bill. I think it's an important step. Thank you.
Representative Lee. Representative Lewis.
Explain my vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I polled my district. This polled almost 90%. For that reason, I'm yes. Thank you.
Representative Maddox.
Yes.
Representative Massey.
Explain my vote briefly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate this being brought forward, and I've really thought a lot about this, and I'm committed to this discussion continuing on. I do thank Representative Mosier for talking about further studies. I think that certainly needs to happen. I too surveyed my district, and I think it was at 92%.
Amen.
But I do have some reservations. I have some reservations about us as legislators regulating medication. I do have some concerns from a dear person to me that is working in Ohio as a physician's assistant. He told me about how since they've passed it, she's seen more than one case of people become addicted to marijuana products. I'm just telling you, I hear that from people. Again, going to the same comments that were said earlier. Whether you vote for or whether you vote against does not make you good or does not make you bad. It makes you a concerned person that is studying and wants the best for Kentuckians. And I too want the best for Kentuckians. So at least for now, my vote is a yes.
Thank you.
Representative McCoy.
Yes.
Representative Nemes.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yes, please, briefly.
First of all, I want to thank everyone that has been an advocate for this issue. I have some ongoing concerns having to do with this bill, concerns having to do with people who are currently serving time, families that have been disrupted, communities that have been disrupted because of the war, the so-called war on drugs, and how this particular product has been a key cause for the devastation that we see in some families and some communities. I have a concern about the corporate interests that are at play currently as we speak, looking at trying to pass this legislation, which will choke small farmers in our state, even though we want this bill to help them. I have concern about how the young people in this community, in our state, could use this product as a gateway drug.
Gateway out.
So there are ongoing concerns, and I appreciate the fact that you all are continuing to take input, feedback, and we'll continue to tweak this as we move forward. I do vote yes.
Thank you.
Representative Minter.
Briefly explain my vote.
Briefly.
I want to thank all of you for sharing your stories, particularly you, Eric, from here, from this room, to our offices, to the doors in my district where support is overwhelmingly in favor of this bill. I also hear you, Mr. Trigg, about your concerns about small farmers. I think you're absolutely right. I hear you, Mr. Carter, about your concerns about the effect on communities of color. Absolutely. And this bill is too tight for my taste as well, as Representative Nemes said. But what it comes down to for me is this, that no one should be a criminal in our state for doing what they must do so that they or their families can live without pain and live in dignity. And for that reason, and for all of you who shared your stories with me everywhere, thank you. This is an enthusiastic case.
Representative Mosier.
I could explain my vote quickly.
Briefly, please.
So, I still have serious concerns about, and I think that we have a lot of questions that are still unanswered, and I just wanna make sure that seriously ill patients who, get the appropriate treatment and care that they need and deserve, and I just wanna make sure that they are getting the medication that they think they're getting. So I'm gonna vote no today because I think we need more research.
Representative Nemes.
5 seconds, Mr. Chairman. I've said a lot, I'm gonna say one more thing, and that is,
Did you ask to explain
may I
your?
explain my vote, Mr. Chairman? You start the clock. This is not the bill that Jason Nemes wants, Representative Nemes wants, this is not the bill that Representative Sim wants. Where this is the bill that we can pass, we will continue to move it forward and try to improve it. But on behalf of those here, on behalf of so many who've told their stories, on behalf of thousands and thousands that I'll never meet, but will benefit from this, I'm a strong yes, Mr.
Representative Reed. Representative Cirolis.
I want to thank everybody for all the hard work on this bill. It is not our place as legislators to intervene in the relationship between physician and patient. Only they know what is best for themselves. This is not the bill I would have liked to have seen, but it is a start. And I'm happy to start. I'm a yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Representative Weiderstein.
Yes.
Chairman Petrie.
May I explain my vote, Rick?
Briefly, Mr. Chairman.
One, I want to commend the sponsor and the prior sponsor, everybody that's been involved working on the bill. Tough issue, a difficult issue, a lot of different angles on it, a lot of different people involved. It's a complicated bill. You have this bill, this subject matter affects 3 or 4 of our committees in the House on subject matter. So it is a complex and difficult animal to wrangle. But I do commend you on accommodating, working, thinking, trying to figure out, which I think everybody in this committee is trying to do, what's the best way to do a bill like this, learn from other people's mistakes and their successes, and how to get to something that is able to help someone, maybe more than just one. And I understand some reservations about the tightness. I understand the reservations about waiving immunity or putting immunity in for certain things. I think they can be dealt with by floor amendment if necessary. That's a if necessary. I think we have enough votes to pass it, and despite that, my vote's yes.
Thank you, sir.